Dr. Philip Romero has written this incredible book called Andy Warhol's Brain, Creative Intelligence for Survival. And the book is really a toolkit for how each of us can harness our own creativity to overcome what Philip calls phantom stress or chronic stress, or the modern era makes us all very stressed out. And for him, I suppose, Warhol was the zenith of somebody who harnessed their inner creativity and really gave it to the entire world, you know. And it is interesting to have Philip talk among these images, because this was a point where Warhol's career was nascent and he was about to form the identity that he would become. So Philip's background is that he is a psychiatrist who works in New York. He knew Andy Warhol and has a kind of a history with Warhol and a 40-year history working as a psychiatrist, and his thesis is really about creative intelligence. The whole thing around Andy Warhol's Brain is that when you sort of delve into the book, it's like what you take from it and then give back to the world yourself, I think, is the main sort of feeling of it. But Philip, I think, like, best way to kick off is to think about when you actually first met Andy and your very first impressions of him, and what kind of exchange happened between you, you know, that made you want to write this book so many years later about him.
When we meet anybody famous, we have preconceived ideas, and if that person is a hero, and Andy was a hero of mine as an artist from probably my late teens. He was shot the week after my graduation from high school. So he became kind of a mythological figure in my own mind. Years later, as a medical student, I went to a gallery in New Orleans that was showing Marcel Duchamp's Green Box. And I was there Saturday morning all alone, photographing the pieces, and the gallerist came up and said, "Oh, who are you?" And after a few chats, he said, "Well, you have to come back and meet Andy. He's going to close the show in the spring, close the gallery." So I showed up for that, nervous, and Edmund took me and said, "You know, this is Andy Warhol, Dr. Romero." I wasn't a doctor yet. And Andy was his typical, you know, hello. But I knew somebody in Galveston, Thomas Downing, who was a world-renowned color field painter from Washington. And Tom said, "Say hello to good old Andy for me." You know, we used to show together at the Stable Gallery. So here I am, frozen, frightened, Andy's ice cold, and I say, "Oh, Tom Downing says hi." Tom Downing, oh my God, what's Tom doing? And suddenly he became a person. He warmed up. There's a great photograph in the book of that first meeting. And after chatting a bit, he took me by the arm and he said, "I want you to meet the blue-haired ladies of New Orleans." Among them were Hazel Guggenheim, Peggy Guggenheim's sister, and they were all sitting in a circle, the dames of New Orleans. And he introduced me to everyone, and he said, "Hazel, didn't you have an appendectomy recently?" And she said, "Oh yes, I did." And he said, "Well, show the doctor your scar." And she pulled up her blouse, and I mean, I was sort of dumbfounded. And I said, "Well, I'm glad it's healing well." So, and then people, the young beauties, were coming up to Andy and sticking their arms out. "Sign me, Andy, I want to be a Warhol." So I got plunged right into the scene with Andy as a kid. And on reflection, years later, when I started to write about this, I said, I knew he was a social genius at that time. He was in it, he was out of it, he was choreographing it, he was funny as hell, witty and acerbic and all that, and he was playing. He just played with everybody. He had been, for 10 years prior to entering fine art, a commercial artist. He wasn't poor. He was very successful. He brought Brownstone. He won top awards in New York as a graphic designer. So he had made it. He was the top of the game by the time he's 40.
One of the things we talked about, you said at that moment, he had formed this identity, the Warhol.
Yes.
And I think it's interesting to know how you sort of think he came to that actually creating his own identity in the world and bringing
What's so important about these paintings is this is the birth of the Warhol. In the 50s, he was a shy, clumsy graphic artist. He was gay, but that was illegal back then, so it was all in the closet. But he loved all the female art directors, and so he was happy there. But he fell in love with Truman Capote and had a heartthrob there. He fell in love with another fellow who was a TV director. They traveled around the world together. I mean, Andy thought he found his true love. They were in Hawaii. He brought home a sailor with him. And Andy just went hysterical. He broke down and crying. He says, I'm going home. So it is my own reflection that the broken-hearted Andy, and you can read about this in Andy Warhol's philosophy, decided to stop seeking friendship and love and make art. And he had support from Henry Geldzahler and others to say, you know, don't do abstract expressionism, do what you do. Just take, you know, commercial things and make them art. So that was a transformation in the art world. I think
It was a psychological tool for him to make art.
Well, more than psychological, it was an emotional core that drove it. The adversity that drove the creation of the Warhol was disappointments in love. And we all face adversity. The first disappointment is with our mommies, the primary attachment. And we know that the brain, as it's developing, really must have a secure environment in love, which Andy actually had. His mom was an artist. They were at the bottom of the social rung, and his brothers and dad were workers. And he was very ill for quite a long time during childhood, and his mom made art with him. She enriched him with all sorts of materials. He went to the movies and fell in love with Shirley Temple. She sent him a signed picture. So there's all this, you know, creativity in the beginning of his life that shields him from the adversity of being gay and bullied and weird and gawky and all these things that he struggled with. Imagine you had a horrible childhood, impoverished, serious medical illness, near-death experiences, spastic, low language skills, spoke a different language at home and at school. What a clumsy, vulnerable little boy this was. And he was white and fair-haired, and he was weird-looking. His mother had lost her first child in World War I, a girl. And my own speculation is that she had PTSD, post-traumatic stress, and little Andy was like, her daughter is back. And
Just strong feminine aspect.
Yes, yes. So he grew up loving girls and women's clothing and all this stuff and playing and cutouts and all these kind of things. So this was the right match for Andy. She was the nurturing environment that allowed him to play, to invent himself, to experiment. It was safe, and he was free to do anything he wanted. His brothers talk about him as really entitled and arrogant and all that. Well, you got mom on my side, so I can do whatever I want. Every child grows up in wonderment. Being alive is a daydream. So this is where, you know, when I would speak to Andy about the things I was doing, he said, "Oh, Phil, this is so good. This is wonderful. I'd love to, you know, talk with you." And I started working on a book called The Art Imperative. And Andy died the week I was supposed to interview him.